At 0947 hours on April 12, 1945, Staff Sergeant Henry Eugene Irwin sat in the radio compartment of a B-29 Superfortress named City of Los Angeles, 11,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, 23 years old, 145 pounds, 5 feet 8 inches tall, born in Adamsville, Alabama, high school graduate, enlisted March 1942. He had spent his first year in the 11th Air Force flying missions over the Aleutian Islands, cold, fog, Japanese positions on Kiska and Attu, then transfer orders. B-29 Superfortresses, the 52nd Squadron, 29th Bomb Group, stationed on Guam. This was his 12th combat mission over Japan. The crew of City of Los Angeles numbered 11 men. Captain Tony Simmerl piloted. First Lieutenant Eugene Carlson served as co-pilot. Second Lieutenant Robert Anderson navigated. Second Lieutenant James Lockyer operated the Bombardier Station. Technical Sergeant Herbert Lubert managed the flight engineer position. Staff Sergeant Irwin handled radio and also served as the Pathfinder operator responsible for smoke markers. 5 gunners occupied defensive positions throughout the aircraft. Staff Sergeant William Lipes in the top turret. Sergeant Howard Stubstead in the left gun blister. Sergeant Alex Boudry in the right gun blister. Sergeant Robert Marshall in the tail turret. Sergeant Michael Lipe in a backup gunner position. The B-29 carried no ball turret gunner. The ventral position had been deleted from later production models to reduce weight and increase range. The target that morning was the Koriyama chemical plant, 150 miles north of Tokyo. But City of Los Angeles was not part of the main bomber stream. It flew alone, 90 minutes ahead of the formation, weather reconnaissance, Pathfinder mission. The job was simple in concept, deadly in execution. Fly to the target area. Drop phosphorus smoke markers through cloud cover. The trailing formation, 300 bombers strong, would use those markers to locate the target when visibility dropped to 0. Without the Pathfinder aircraft, the entire mission would abort or bomb blindly through clouds with minimal effectiveness. Irwin's specific responsibility was the smoke markers themselves. White phosphorus canisters, each one approximately the size of a 20mm shell. Standard operating procedure was straightforward. Pull the safety pin. Drop the canister immediately through a metal chute in the floor of the aircraft. The chute angled downward through the bomb bay. Gravity and airspeed would carry the marker clear of the aircraft within 3 seconds. The phosphorus would ignite on contact with oxygen. It burned at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Water could not extinguish it. Only complete oxygen deprivation would stop the reaction. Each marker produced thick white smoke visible for miles in any weather condition. The Japanese understood Pathfinder doctrine. Intelligence reports confirmed that enemy fighter commanders prioritized early reconnaissance aircraft. Destroy the Pathfinder, and the entire formation behind it flies blind. Abort rates climb. Bombing effectiveness drops. Fighter units across Japan had standing orders to intercept weather aircraft at maximum range with maximum force. 300 Japanese fighters were stationed within intercept range of the Koriyama approach route. That number included conventional interceptor squadrons and kamikaze units recently redeployed from Okinawa. 6 days earlier, on April 6th, the Japanese had launched a mass kamikaze attack against American naval forces off Okinawa. 355 aircraft. Most did not return. The survivors had been repositioned to defend the home islands. City of Los Angeles flew without escort. P-51 Mustangs lacked the range to accompany Pathfinder missions this deep into Japanese airspace. The bomber relied entirely on altitude, speed, and defensive armament. The B-29 cruised at 11,000 feet, below optimal altitude but high enough to avoid most anti-aircraft fire and low enough to identify landmarks through broken cloud cover. Maximum speed at this altitude approached 300 miles per hour. Defensive armament consisted of 12 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon in the tail position. Effective range of the 50 caliber guns was approximately 1,000 yards. Japanese fighters typically close to within 200 yards before opening fire. If you want to see how Irwin's mission turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories about forgotten heroes. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Irwin. The Koriyama approach required crossing the Japanese coast north of Tokyo, then turning inland toward the chemical plant. Weather forecast predicted 8/10 cloud cover over the target area. Visibility at bombing altitude would be near zero. Radar could identify the general target zone, but lacked the precision to distinguish individual factory buildings from surrounding structures. Only visual markers placed by a Pathfinder aircraft could guide bombardiers to specific aim points. Without those markers, the mission would fail. Irwin had prepared 6 smoke markers for the mission. Each canister sat in a wooden rack near his radio station. He would carry them one at a time to the chute, pull the pin, drop the marker, and return for the next. The process took approximately 30 seconds per marker. The entire marking sequence would last 3 minutes. During those 3 minutes, City of Los Angeles would fly straight and level over the target area. No evasive maneuvers, no deviation from course. The aircraft would be completely vulnerable to fighters and anti-aircraft fire. The crew had discussed the mission during the pre-flight briefing. Captain Simmerl had been direct. Early Pathfinder missions drew heavy fighter response. The odds of completing 12 missions were statistically poor. Most crews lasted 8 to 10 missions before being shot down, killed, or rotated home. This was mission number 12 for every man aboard City of Los Angeles. They were already past the statistical survival window, but the mission had to be flown. 300 bombers were already airborne behind them. Thousands of tons of bombs loaded, fuel burned, men committed. Turning back was not an option. At 0951 hours, Captain Simmerl announced over the intercom that they were approaching the initial point. Time to target. 60 seconds. Irwin stood and moved to the smoke marker rack. He selected the first canister. It weighed approximately 4 pounds. Cold metal. He carried it to the chute opening in the floor. The chute was a metal tube angled at 45 degrees, 12 inches in diameter. He positioned the canister at the opening. His right hand gripped the safety pin. Standard procedure called for pulling the pin and dropping the marker in one smooth motion. Hesitation meant the marker could ignite inside the aircraft. 3 seconds or less. Pull and drop. At 0952 hours, Irwin pulled the pin. At 0952 hours and 8 seconds, the phosphorus marker exploded in Irwin's face. The pin had been pulled. The canister had been dropped into the chute. Then detonation. Premature ignition. Either the fuse timing was defective or the marker had struck something inside the chute and detonated on impact. The result was immediate and catastrophic. 1300 degrees Fahrenheit of burning phosphorus sprayed directly into Irwin's face from a distance of less than 2 feet. The phosphorus adhered to skin on contact. It burned through the flesh of his nose instantly. His eyes sealed shut as the lids burned and swelled. Flames ignited his flight suit. The synthetic fabric melted into his chest and arms. He inhaled reflexively and phosphorus particles entered his throat and lungs. The pain was immediate and absolute. 3rd-degree burns across his entire face. Both hands burned where he had gripped the canister. His chest and arms burning where flaming phosphorus had sprayed across his torso. Smoke filled the fuselage within seconds. Thick white smoke. Choking. Visibility dropped to 0. Captain Simmerl could not see his instrument panel. The artificial horizon disappeared. The altimeter disappeared. Airspeed indicator invisible. He was flying blind in an aircraft loaded with fuel and bombs at 11,000 feet over enemy territory. First Lieutenant Carlson in the co-pilot's seat was equally blind. Both pilots began coughing. The smoke burned their throats and lungs. In the nose section, Second Lieutenant Anderson abandoned his navigation table. He could not see his charts. He could not see his instruments. He moved toward the cockpit, but the smoke was too thick. He stopped and pressed himself against the bulkhead. Second Lieutenant Lockie left the Bombardier station. The Norden bomb site was useless. He could not see the target. He could not see anything. He retreated toward the flight deck and collided with Anderson in the smoke. The phosphorus canister was still burning. It had not fallen through the chute. Either it had bounced back into the aircraft or it had never entered the chute at all. The canister now lay somewhere on the flight deck or navigator's table. burning at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Standard fire suppression procedures were useless. Water would accelerate the phosphorus reaction. Carbon dioxide extinguishers would have no effect. The only way to stop white phosphorus from burning was to eliminate all oxygen inside a pressurized aircraft at 11,000 feet. That was impossible. A phosphorus smoke marker was designed to burn for a minimum of 15 minutes. 15 minutes of smoke generation to ensure visibility for trailing bombers. That meant the canister on the flight deck would continue burning for 15 minutes unless removed from the aircraft. 15 minutes of smoke inside the fuselage would kill the crew through asphyxiation long before the phosphorus burned out. The pilots would lose consciousness. The aircraft would enter an uncontrolled descent. Impact with the Pacific Ocean would occur approximately 4 minutes after the pilots blacked out. The B-29 Superfortress was a pressurized aircraft. That pressurization was essential for high-altitude operations. At 25,000 feet, unpressurized crew would lose consciousness within minutes. But city of Los Angeles was currently at 11,000 feet. Emergency depressurization at this altitude would cause rapid oxygen depletion, extreme cold, and potential structural stress. But it would not immediately incapacitate the crew. The problem was time. Depressurization took 30 seconds minimum. The smoke was already overwhelming. 30 seconds was too long. The aircraft began losing altitude. Captain Simrel could not see to fly. He held the control yoke steady and tried to maintain level flight by feel. But without instruments or visual reference, he was guessing. The B-29 dipped and rolled. First Lieutenant Carlson grabbed his own control yoke and tried to stabilize the aircraft. He could not see either. Both pilots worked blind while choking on phosphorus smoke. Behind them, Japanese fighters were closing. The smoke pouring from city of Los Angeles was visible for 20 miles. Fighter pilots tracked the white plume like a highway marker. 18 fighters were inbound. Lead elements would reach firing range in less than 90 seconds. A smoking B-29 losing altitude with no escort was an easy kill. First Lieutenant Carlson keyed the intercom. His voice was hoarse from smoke inhalation. He called for bailout preparation. The crew should prepare to abandon aircraft. He repeated the order twice. Most of the crew could not hear him. The intercom system was failing. Static filled the channels. Those who did hear the order did not move. Bailout into what? They were over the Pacific Ocean 300 miles from the nearest American-held territory. Water temperature was 50 degrees. Survival time in the water was 30 minutes maximum. Bailout meant death by drowning or hypothermia. Irwin was on fire. His uniform burned. His flesh burned. The phosphorus embedded in his skin continued burning. He could not see. His eyes were sealed shut by burns and swelling. He could not breathe properly. Phosphorus particles in his lungs created a chemical burn with every breath. He was standing somewhere near the radio compartment. He knew the flight deck layout by memory. 14 feet separated the radio compartment from the navigator's table at the front of the aircraft. 14 feet through smoke. 14 feet past the flight engineer's station. 14 feet past other crew members. 14 feet through a pressurized bulkhead. He had no gloves. The standard issue fire-resistant gloves were stored in a locker he could not see and could not reach. He had no fire suit. He wore a standard flight suit that was currently burning. He had no fire suppression equipment that would work on white phosphorus. He had only his hands and his memory of the aircraft layout. The phosphorus canister was burning somewhere forward, on the navigator's table, or on the floor near the table, or rolling loose on the flight deck. It had to be found. It had to be removed from the aircraft. If it remained inside, everyone aboard would die. The pilots would lose consciousness. The aircraft would crash. 11 men would die in the Pacific Ocean. Irwin knew where the canister was. He was the radio operator. The smoke markers were his responsibility. He had dropped the marker. He knew its trajectory. He knew where it had to be. No one else aboard had that knowledge. The pilots could not leave their stations. The navigator was blind in the smoke. The bombardier was blind. The flight engineer could not navigate forward through the smoke while monitoring engine status. The gunners were isolated in their positions. Irwin was the only crew member who knew exactly where the burning canister lay. At 0952 hours and 35 seconds, 27 seconds after the explosion, Henry Irwin stood up and began moving toward the flight deck. He was blind. He was on fire. He was inhaling phosphorus smoke with every breath. His hands were burned to the bone. His face was burned beyond recognition, and he was walking forward into the smoke to find a canister burning at 5,000 degrees. At 0952 hours and 40 seconds, Henry Irwin reached the navigator's table. His eyes were sealed shut. He could see nothing. He navigated by memory and touch. His hands extended forward through the smoke. His fingers found the edge of the metal table. Then heat. Intense heat radiating from the phosphorus canister lying on the table's surface. He picked up the canister with both hands. The phosphorus was burning at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat melted through the burned flesh of his palms instantly. The canister adhered to his hands. Phosphorus bonded with tissue. It continued burning. There was no way to drop it. No way to release it. His hands were now part of the chemical reaction. He turned toward the cockpit. 14 feet behind him. He had to reverse course. Carry the canister forward. Find the pilot's window. Throw the marker out of the aircraft. He began walking. Each step was measured. He could not see obstacles. He could not see crew members. He moved slowly through the smoke with the burning canister held away from his body. But phosphorus dripped from the canister. Molten drops fell onto his chest. His uniform was already burning. The additional phosphorus accelerated the fire. Flames spread across his torso. He passed the flight engineer's station. Technical Sergeant Lubbert was at his panel monitoring engine status. Lubbert saw movement in the smoke, saw flames, saw Irwin walking forward with his arms extended, holding something that burned white hot. Lubbert stepped into Irwin's path. He believed Irwin was disoriented by his burns, believed he was trying to jump from the aircraft, believed he had to be stopped. Irwin could not see Lubbert, could not see the obstruction. His forearm hit Lubbert's chest. He pushed forward with his shoulder. Lubbert staggered back. Irwin kept moving. He had 7 feet remaining. 7 feet to the cockpit. 7 feet to the co-pilot's window. He could feel heat from the canisters spreading up his forearms. The phosphorus was burning through tissue, reaching bone. Captain Simmerl was still flying blind. His hands gripped the control yoke. He held the aircraft as level as possible without instruments. He heard movement behind him, heard footsteps, could not turn to look, had to maintain aircraft control. First Lieutenant Carlson was in the right seat attempting to clear smoke from his eyes. He saw Irwin emerge from the smoke, saw the flames, saw the canister burning in Irwin's hands. Irwin reached the co-pilot's position. The window was to his right. He knew its location. 12 inches wide, 8 inches tall, hinged at the top, secured with a metal latch. He had to open the window, had to force the canister through the opening, had to do it with hands that no longer functioned properly. The burns had destroyed nerve endings. His fingers barely responded. He transferred the canister to his left hand, held it against his chest. His right hand reached for the window latch. His fingers found the metal lever. He pulled. The latch released. The window was still closed. Pressure differential held it shut. 11,000 feet. Cabin pressure was 5 pounds per square inch higher than external air pressure. That pressure held the window against its frame. He pulled harder. The window cracked open 1 inch. Air began screaming through the gap. The pressure differential was equalizing. Violent decompression. Wind speed at the window opening exceeded 280 miles per hour. The window slammed fully open. The sudden decompression hit Irwin like a physical blow. He staggered but did not fall. He shifted the canister back to both hands, held it against the window opening. The wind fought him. 280 miles per hour of airflow pushed against the canister. He forced it toward the opening, 8 inches wide. The canister was 3 inches in diameter. It would fit. He pushed harder. The wind pushed back. His strength was failing. Blood loss, shock, phosphorus poisoning. His legs shook. His vision was already gone. Now his balance was going. He braced his left shoulder against the cockpit bulkhead, used his body weight, forced the canister through the window opening against the wind blast. The The canister caught on the window frame. Stuck. He twisted his wrists. The phosphorus burned deeper. The canister rotated, cleared the frame. The wind caught it. At 0953 hours and 12 seconds, the canister was torn from his hands and disappeared into the slipstream. Con. The burning phosphorus marker was out of the aircraft. It tumbled toward the Pacific Ocean 4 miles below. The immediate threat was eliminated, but the damage was done. Smoke still filled the fuselage. The crew was choking. The pilots still could not see. And Irwin was standing in the cockpit, blind, burning, with phosphorus embedded in his hands, face, and chest. Smoke began clearing at 0953 hours and 20 seconds. The open window created airflow through the fuselage. Fresh air entered through gaps in the bomb bay. Smoke vented through the co-pilot's window. Visibility improved incrementally. Captain Simrel saw his instruments again. Altimeter read 9,800 feet. The aircraft had lost 1,200 feet during the emergency. Airspeed was 220 knots. Too slow. He advanced the throttles. The engines responded. Airspeed increased. First Lieutenant Carlson could see again. He looked out his window. Clear sky. Broken clouds below. Then movement. Aircraft. Multiple aircraft. 18 Japanese fighters closing from 4 o'clock high. Range approximately 1,200 yards and decreasing. Lead fighters were Kawasaki Ki-61 interceptors. Twin engine. Heavily armed. Fast. Effective engagement range was 600 yards. Current closure rate meant the fighters would reach firing range in 25 seconds. Carlson keyed the intercom. His voice was hoarse. Fighter attack inbound. 4 o'clock high. 18 bogies. All gunners respond. The intercom was working again. Static had cleared when the smoke vented. In the tail position, Sergeant Marshall confirmed visual contact. In the top turret, Staff Sergeant Lipes traversed his guns toward the incoming fighters. Side gunners Stubstead and Boudry confirmed they had targets. The B-29's defensive armament consisted of 4 remote-controlled turret systems. Top turret with 250 caliber machine guns. Tail turret with 250 caliber guns and 120 millimeter cannon. 2 side blisters, each with 250 caliber guns. Total of 10 50 caliber machine guns and 1 cannon. Effective range, 1,000 yards maximum, 600 yards optimal. The Japanese fighters were at 1,200 yards, outside effective range, but closing fast. At 0953 hours and 45 seconds, the Japanese fighters entered firing range. Distance, 600 yards. The fighters spread into attack formation. 3 elements of 6 aircraft each. First element diving from above. Second element attacking level from the right. Third element climbing from below. Standard Japanese fighter doctrine. Multiple approach angles. Overwhelmed defensive fire. Ensure at least some fighters reach firing position regardless of turret response. Sergeant Marshall in the tail turret opened fire first. His 20 millimeter cannon fired 3 round bursts. Tracers arced toward the lead fighters climbing from below. Staff Sergeant Lipes in the top turret engaged the diving fighters. His twin 50 calibers fired in sustained bursts. Brass casings ejected from the turret and tumbled through the slipstream. Side gunners engaged the level attackers from the right. Irwin collapsed between the pilot and co-pilot seats. His legs gave out. He fell onto the cockpit floor. Second Lieutenant Lockie, the bombardier, had moved back to the flight deck when the smoke cleared. He saw Irwin on the floor, saw the burns, saw that Irwin's face was unrecognizable. The nose was gone. The lips were gone. The eyelids were swollen shut. Both hands were charred black. The uniform had burned away from his chest, exposing third-degree burns across his torso. Lockie had basic first aid training. Every crew member did. But first aid training did not cover burns this severe. Morphine was standard treatment for pain, but morphine could suppress breathing. Irwin was already struggling to breathe. Phosphorus in his lungs. Smoke inhalation. Shock. Administering morphine might kill him. Lockie did nothing. He knelt beside Irwin and tried to assess the injuries. There was no place to touch that was not burned. No way to help that would not cause additional damage. He stayed beside Irwin and waited. The Japanese fighters closed to 400 yards, then 300. The B-29's turrets tracked the targets. Defensive fire intensified. The fighters did not break off. They pressed their attacks. At 300 yards, the fighters opened fire. 20-millimeter cannon rounds from 18 fighters converged on city of Los Angeles. Rounds impacted the wings, fuselage, and tail section. Metal tore. Hydraulic lines ruptured. One round struck the number 3 engine cowling. The cowling dented but held. No fire. The engine continued running. Captain Simmerl threw the aircraft into a hard evasive turn. The B-29 banked 30 degrees right. Airspeed dropped to 200 knots. The turn disrupted the fighters' attack geometry. Several fighters overshot. They broke off and circled for another pass. But more fighters were coming. The battle was just beginning. At 0953 hours and 50 seconds, the Japanese fighters opened fire from 400 yards. All 18 aircraft converged on city of Los Angeles simultaneously. Cannon rounds and machine gun bullets filled the air. The B-29's top turret, tail turret, and side blister guns returned fire. Tracers crossed in the sky. The sound was continuous. Cannon fire, machine gun fire, the roar of engines, the whistle of wind through damaged metal. Irwin lay on the cockpit floor between the pilot and co-pilot seats. He was conscious but motionless. Second Lieutenant Lockie knelt beside him attempting first aid. The Bombardier had no bandages, no burn dressings, no morphine he dared administer. The standard first aid kit contained supplies for treating minor injuries, cuts, abrasions, small burns. Nothing for injuries this catastrophic. Burns covered Irwin's face entirely. The flesh was charred black in some areas, white and blistered in others. Both hands were burned from fingertips to wrists. The palms were destroyed. Bone was visible through the tissue. His chest showed third-degree burns through the remains of his flight suit. Phosphorus embedded in the tissue continued burning. Small white flames flickered on his hands and chest. The phosphorus would burn until it consumed all available fuel or until oxygen was eliminated. Lockie could not extinguish the flames. Water would spread the reaction. Smothering would deprive Irwin of oxygen he desperately needed to breathe. The crew could only watch the phosphorus burn through tissue until the chemical reaction exhausted itself. Lockie checked Irwin's breathing. Shallow, rapid. Irwin's chest rose and fell in short gasps. Phosphorus particles in his lungs created chemical burns with every breath. His airway was swelling. Without medical intervention, the swelling would close his throat completely. Asphyxiation would follow. Time was critical, but the nearest medical facility was on Iwo Jima, 280 miles away. Flight time, 1 hour minimum at current speed. Irwin had to survive 1 hour without treatment. His survival probability decreased with every passing minute. The aircraft could not climb, could not outrun the fighters, could not reach cloud cover at current altitude. Captain Simmerl maintained evasive maneuvers, hard turns, altitude changes, anything to disrupt the fighters' attack geometry. But evasive maneuvers cost speed, and speed was life. The B-29 cruised at 240 knots. Japanese fighters flew at 300 knots. The B-29 could not outrun them, could only evade and hope defensive fire drove them off. The first fighter made a conventional pass from 4 o'clock high. It closed to 300 yards, fired a burst, then broke away. Rounds impacted the number 3 engine cowling again. No fire. The engine continued running, but vibration increased. Something had been damaged. Not critical yet, but sustained fire would destroy the engine. Captain Simmerl watched the engine instruments. Oil pressure steady. Temperature rising, but within limits. He left the throttle set. The second fighter closed to 150 yards before pulling up. Too close. Defensive fire from the top turret scored hits on the fighter's fuselage. Smoke trailed from the engine. The fighter pulled vertical, rolled, and dove away toward the ocean below. Staff Sergeant Lipes in the top turret tracked the fighter until it disappeared into clouds. Possible kill. Unconfirmed. The third fighter closed from 6 o'clock level, directly behind the aircraft. The tail gunner's primary field of fire. Sergeant Marshall opened fire at 600 yards. His 20mm cannon sent 3-round bursts toward the fighter. The fighter did not deviate. It maintained course, close to 400 yards. Marshall fired continuously. The fighter's canopy shattered. The pilot was hit, but the fighter did not break off. It continued straight toward the B-29's tail. At 50 yards, the fighter impacted the vertical stabilizer. The fighter's left wing struck the stabilizer 3 feet below the top. The wing tore away from the fighter's fuselage. The fighter's main body tumbled past the tail section and fell toward the ocean. The impact tore a 6-foot section from the B-29's vertical stabilizer. Metal ripped away. The tail shuddered. Sergeant Marshall in the tail turret felt the impact through the airframe. He checked his position. Turret intact. Guns functional. He was alive. Captain Simrel felt the rudder controls go soft. 40% of rudder authority lost. The aircraft could still turn, but response was sluggish. He compensated with aileron and throttle adjustments. The B-29 remained controllable, but stability was degraded. Another impact like that would destroy tail control completely. At 0954 hours and 18 seconds, the fourth fighter approached from 6 o'clock level. Same attack profile as the previous fighter. Sergeant Marshall engaged at maximum range. His guns fired. Tracers reached toward the fighter. The fighter did not return fire, did not maneuver. It flew straight toward the tail section. Marshall realized the intent. Deliberate ramming attack. Kamikaze. The pilot had no intention of pulling away. Marshall kept firing. His guns tracked the fighter. Rounds hit the fuselage, hit the engine, hit the canopy. The fighter kept coming, close to 200 yards. Marshall's tail guns jammed. Both 50 caliber machine guns stopped firing simultaneously. Ammunition feed malfunction or hydraulic failure from the previous impact. The guns were silent. The fighter closed to 100 yards. Marshall had no way to stop it. The fighter closed to 30 yards. Marshall braced himself. The fighter impacted the tail section below his turret position at 0954 hours and 51 seconds. The explosion tore an 8-foot section from the tail. The blast wave lifted Marshall inside his turret. His head struck the canopy. His vision blurred. The turret filled with smoke. He could not see, could not determine damage. He keyed the intercom. Tail gunner reporting. Position hit. Turret intact. Hydraulics lost. Guns jammed. Captain Simrel felt the second impact. Rudder control degraded further. The aircraft wanted to your left. He counted with right aileron and throttle adjustments on the right engines. The B-29 remained flyable but barely. Another hit would make the aircraft uncontrollable. Fighters 5 through 9 made conventional attack passes. They closed to 300 yards. Fired bursts, then broke away. The top turret and side blister guns engaged continuously. Staff Sergeant Lipes claimed one fighter destroyed when it exploded at 400 yards. Side gunner Stubstead claimed another damaged when it descended trailing smoke. Side gunner Boudry reported hits on a third fighter, but could not confirm destruction. The fighters scattered after taking losses, but more were inbound. The 10th fighter closed from 3 o'clock level. Staff Sergeant Lipes in the top turret tracked it. His twin 50 calibers fired sustained bursts. Tracers walked toward the fighter. The fighter did not break off. It maintained course. Lipes kept firing. At 200 yards, his rounds hit the fighter's left wing root. The wing separated from the fuselage. The fighter rolled inverted and spiraled past the cockpit at 0956 hours and 40 seconds. Captain Simrel saw it pass. Saw the pilot still in the cockpit. Saw the fighter tumble toward the ocean. Time was 0956 hours and 50 seconds. 10 Japanese fighters had attacked. 2 had deliberately rammed the aircraft. 3 were confirmed destroyed by defensive fire. 3 more were damaged. 2 had broken off without sustaining visible damage. 8 fighters remained from the original 18, but those 8 were reforming for another attack. And City of Los Angeles had sustained serious damage. Tail section compromised. Rudder control degraded. Tail guns jammed. And Irwin was dying on the cockpit floor. At 0957 hours and 10 seconds, the 11th fighter began its attack run. This one approached from 12 o'clock level, head-on. The most dangerous attack angle for both attacker and defender. Combined closure rate exceeded 500 miles per hour. Engagement time measured in seconds. The B-29 had limited forward-firing armament. Only the co-pilot's single 50-caliber machine gun could engage directly ahead. First Lieutenant Carlson gripped the gun controls. He waited. The fighter closed. 800 yards. 700. Carlson opened fire. At 0957 hours and 15 seconds, the Japanese fighter closed head-on at a combined speed exceeding 500 miles per hour. First Lieutenant Carlson held the co-pilot's gun controls steady. His single 50-caliber machine gun fired in sustained bursts. Tracers reached toward the fighter. The distance closed at 800 feet per second. Every second reduced the range by more than 2 football fields. Captain Semerel held the B-29's course. No evasive maneuvers. The fighter pilot expected the bomber to turn. Expected panic. Expected the pilot to break formation discipline and present a flank shot. Semerel did not turn. He held the nose steady and let Carlson fire. The fighter opened fire at 800 yards. 20-millimeter cannon rounds and machine gun bullets converged on the B-29's nose section. Rounds impacted the forward fuselage. Glass shattered. Metal tore. One round hit Second Lieutenant Lockie in the left shoulder. He had been kneeling beside Irwin. The impact threw him backward. He collapsed against the cockpit bulkhead. Blood soaked through his flight suit. The fighter did not deviate from its course. Range 400 yards. Carlson's nose gun fired continuously. Brass casings ejected and rattled across the cockpit floor. His tracers walked toward the fighter's engine cowling. At 300 yards, rounds hit the fighter's canopy. The canopy shattered. The pilot was visible for 1 second. Then the fighter broke left. Hard brake. Maximum bank angle. The fighter passed under the B-29's left wing at 80 yards. No impact. It missed. The pilot had broken at the last possible moment. Either Carlson's fire had forced him off, or his nerve had failed. 2 more fighters approached simultaneously. 12th and 13th. They came from 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock high, both diving. Staff Sergeant Lipes in the top turret engaged both targets. He could not fire on both simultaneously. He chose the right fighter. His twin 50 calibers traversed right and elevated. He fired a 4-second burst. Tracers reached the fighter. It began smoking. The smoke darkened. Black smoke. Engine fire. The fighter rolled and descended. Confirmed kill. Lipes traversed left toward the second fighter. His guns tracked the target. He fired. The fighter was at 100 yards. His rounds hit the engine. The fighter exploded at 0957 hours and 58 seconds. Debris from the explosion spread across 200 yards of sky. Pieces of wing. Fuselage sections. The explosion occurred close enough that debris impacted the B-29's left wing. Metal fragments struck the leading edge. Small dents. No critical damage. No fuel leaks. The wing held. The 14th fighter made its attack from 6 o'clock low, climbing pass, the tail gunner's primary engagement zone. But Sergeant Marshall's guns were jammed. Hydraulic power lost from the ramming impacts. He attempted to fire manually. His hands gripped the manual charging handles. He worked them frantically. The guns would not fire. The hydraulic system was completely dead. He had no way to engage the fighter except to watch. The fighter climbed toward the tail section. Staff Sergeant Lipes in the top turret could not depress his guns low enough to engage a target directly below and behind the aircraft. The side blister gunners could not traverse their weapons far enough aft. The fighter was in a blind spot. It closed to 200 yards. Sergeant Marshall watched it approach. He keyed the intercom. Reported the fighter inbound. Reported his guns were inoperative. Reported he could do nothing. The fighter pilot pulled vertical at 200 yards. The fighter went nose up into a climb. The engine strained. The airspeed dropped rapidly. At vertical, the fighter had no forward airspeed, only upward momentum. The climb continued for 3 seconds. Then the fighter stalled. The nose dropped. The fighter entered a flat spin. It rotated once. Twice, the pilot attempted recovery. The spin continued. The fighter descended through 4,000 feet, 3,000, 2,000. It did not recover. It impacted the ocean surface at approximately 0959 hours and 5 seconds. The time was now 0959 hours and 30 seconds. No additional fighters were engaging. The remaining Japanese aircraft had either expended their ammunition or broken off the attack. The formation was scattered. Some fighters descended toward their bases. Others circled at a distance, but did not close. The immediate threat had passed. City of Los Angeles had survived. The B-29 was alone over the Pacific Ocean. Altitude 9,600 feet. Airspeed 230 knots. Course southeast toward Iwo Jima. Distance to Iwo Jima, 280 miles. Flight time at current speed, 1 hour and 13 minutes. The aircraft was damaged but airworthy. Number 3 engine vibrating but producing power. Tail section partially destroyed. Rudder control reduced. Tail guns inoperative. Co-pilot's window still open. Wind screamed through the opening. The cockpit was freezing. Temperature had dropped to 20 degrees. The crew endured it. Closing the window was impossible. The latch mechanism had been damaged during the emergency opening. Captain Simmerl assessed the situation. Aircraft controllable. Engines functioning. Fuel sufficient for Iwo Jima plus reserves. No fighters pursuing. The mission had failed. The smoke markers had not been dropped over the target. The trailing bomber formation would have to abort or bomb through clouds without visual reference. But the crew was alive. Most of the crew. He did not know the status of everyone aboard. The intercom was functional, but reports were incomplete. He keyed the intercom. All stations report status. The responses came in sequence. Flight engineer Libert reported superficial damage to electrical systems, but all engines running. Top turret gunner Leipz reported ammunition low, but turret functional. Side gunner Stubstead and Boudry reported minor injuries from shrapnel, but guns operational. Tail gunner Marshall reported tail guns destroyed, turret intact, injuries minor. Navigator Anderson reported navigation equipment functional. Bombardier Lockheed did not respond. Radio operator Irwin did not respond. First Lieutenant Carlson looked back into the cockpit. Lockheed was conscious but injured. Shoulder wound. Bleeding controlled. He would survive. Irwin was on the floor, still breathing, still conscious. But his condition was deteriorating. His breathing had become more labored. His pulse was weak. Blood loss. Shock. Phosphorus poisoning. Without immediate medical intervention, he would not survive the flight to Iwo Jima. Carlson contacted Iwo Jima Tower on the emergency frequency. City of Los Angeles declaring emergency. Inbound from Koriyama mission. 2 crew members critically injured. Requesting priority landing. Medical team standing by. Burn unit on alert. Ambulance on runway. Iwo Jima Tower acknowledged. Emergency declared. Priority landing approved. Runway cleared. Medical teams alerted. Estimated time of arrival requested. Carlson calculated. Current position 280 miles north-northwest of Iwo Jima. Airspeed 240 knots. Flight time 1 hour 16 minutes. ETA 11:42 hours. Iwo Jima confirmed. 1 hour and 16 minutes. Irwin had to survive 1 hour and 16 minutes without medical treatment. His injuries included third-degree burns to face, hands, arms, and chest, phosphorus embedded in tissue, smoke inhalation, chemical burns to lungs and throat, airway swelling, blood loss, shock. Medical literature in 1945 listed survival rates for phosphorus burns of this severity. The documented cases numbered 0. No one had survived burns this extensive from white phosphorus exposure. The chemical was too reactive. The burns too deep. The systemic damage too severe. But Irwin was still breathing. His chest rose and fell. Shallow breaths. Rapid breaths. But breathing. Second Lieutenant Lockheed remained beside him. Monitored his condition. Checked his pulse every few minutes. The pulse was weak but present. Lockheed had no medical supplies that would help. No plasma. No saline. No morphine. No burn dressings. He could only wait and hoped Irwin's body could endure until they reached Iwo Jima. Captain Simrel maintained course and speed, 240 knots. Maximum cruise speed would drain fuel reserves. Slower speed would extend flight time and decrease Irwin's survival probability. 240 knots was the compromise. Fast enough to minimize flight time. Slow enough to ensure fuel reserves. He watched the engine instruments. Number 3 engine temperature was climbing slowly. Oil pressure was dropping slowly. The engine was failing. Not immediately, but progressive deterioration was visible. He reduced throttle on number 3 by 10%. The temperature stabilized. The vibration decreased slightly. The engine would last until Iwo Jima. Probably. First Lieutenant Carlson monitored the descent profile. Iwo Jima's runway was at sea level. City of Los Angeles was at 9,600 feet. Descent had to begin at the right point. Too early and they would waste time climbing back. Too late and they would overshoot the runway. He calculated the descent point. 60 miles from Iwo Jima. Begin descent at 500 feet per minute. Arrive at pattern altitude with minimum maneuvering. Time passed slowly. The crew waited. The engines droned. The wind howled through the open co-pilot window. The temperature in the cockpit remained near freezing. Irwin lay on the floor. His breathing continued. Shallow, rapid, but continuous. Lockie checked his pulse. Still present. Still weak. Irwin had been burned at 0952 hours. It was now 1,038 hours. 46 minutes had passed. He had survived 46 minutes. He needed to survive 30 more. At 1,058 hours, Iwo Jima appeared on the horizon. The island was visible as a dark line against the ocean. Mount Suribachi rose from the southern tip. The airfield stretched across the center of the island. 3 runways, all visible. Captain Simrel contacted the tower. City of Los Angeles on final approach. Emergency landing. Ambulance confirmed standing by. Tower cleared them straight in. No pattern. No delay. Runway 24. Wind negligible. Cleared to land. Simrel began the descent. 500 feet per minute. The altimeter unwound. 8,000 feet. 6,000. 4,000. He extended the landing gear at 2,000 feet. 3 green lights. Gear down and locked. He extended flaps. The airspeed decreased. 180 knots. Pattern altitude. He turned onto final approach. Runway centerline visible. 2 miles. 1 mile. The runway rose to meet them. At 11:38 hours. 4 minutes ahead of estimated arrival. City of Los Angeles touched down on runway 24 at Iwo Jima. The main gear contacted the runway surface. The tail settled. Simrel applied brakes. The B-29 decelerated. He steered toward the taxiway. An ambulance followed the aircraft. Red cross markings visible on the roof. The aircraft stopped. Simrel shut down the engines. Silence. The propellers coasted to a stop. The mission was over. At 11:40 hours, the ambulance reached City of Los Angeles on the taxiway. Medical personnel opened the rear doors. 2 stretchers. 4 corpsmen. They climbed into the aircraft through the forward hatch. The crew directed them to the cockpit. Irwin lay on the floor between the pilot and co-pilot seats. Still conscious. Still breathing. The corpsman assessed his condition immediately. 3rd-degree burns to face. Both hands. Both forearms. Chest. Phosphorus fragments visible in the tissue. Airways compromised. Breathing labored. Pulse weak and rapid. Blood pressure critically low. They loaded him onto a stretcher. Moved him carefully through the fuselage. Lowered him through the hatch. Placed him in the ambulance. 2nd Lieutenant Lockie followed on the 2nd stretcher. Shoulder wound. Stable condition. The ambulance departed for the 38th Field Hospital within 3 minutes of the aircraft stopping. Army surgeons at the 38th Field Hospital began treatment at 11:50 hours. Irwin was transferred to the surgical ward. The medical staff had been alerted to expect severe burn casualties. They had prepared plasma stocks, saline solution, surgical instruments, anesthesia, but nothing in their training or experience had prepared them for injuries this severe. The attending surgeon examined Irwin and documented the wounds. Third-degree burns covered 90% of his face. The nose was completely destroyed. The eyelids were burned shut. Both ears were damaged. Burns extended down his neck to his chest. Both hands were burned from fingertips to mid-forearm. The palms showed exposed bone. Phosphorus fragments were embedded throughout the burned tissue. The phosphorus had to be removed. Standard procedure for embedded phosphorus was surgical extraction. Each fragment had to be located, isolated, and removed individually. The surgeons began at 12:05 hours. They worked under magnification, used fine surgical instruments, tweezers, scalpels. Each phosphorus fragment was extracted and placed in water-filled containers. Water prevented reignition. The process was slow, methodical. The surgeons worked for 4 hours. They removed hundreds of phosphorus fragments. Some were microscopic. Some were several millimeters across. By 16:10 hours, the extraction was complete. Plasma was administered immediately after surgery. Irwin had lost significant blood. His blood pressure remained critically low. Plasma would restore blood volume and stabilize his cardiovascular system. 4 units were administered intravenously over the next 6 hours. Saline followed. Hydration was essential. Burns caused massive fluid loss through damaged tissue. Without aggressive fluid replacement, shock would progress to organ failure. Morphine was administered for pain. The dosage was carefully controlled. Too much would suppress breathing. Irwin's airways were already compromised by chemical burns and swelling. The medical staff monitored his respiratory rate continuously. Oxygen was administered through a nasal cannula. His oxygen saturation remained marginal but stable. Infection was the primary concern. Third-degree burns destroyed the skin barrier. Bacteria could enter the bloodstream directly through burned tissue. Without antibiotics, infection was inevitable. But antibiotics in 1945 were limited. Penicillin existed, but supplies were restricted. The 38th Field Hospital had small quantities reserved for critical cases. Irwin qualified. Penicillin injections began on April 13th. The injections continued every 4 hours for 2 weeks. The surgeons estimated his survival probability at 50%, maybe less. Phosphorus burns of this severity had no documented survivors in medical literature. The chemical created deep tissue damage that extended far beyond the visible burn area. The systemic effects included liver damage, kidney damage, cardiovascular stress, and neurological complications. Most patients with burns this extensive died within 72 hours from shock, infection, or organ failure. On April 14th, Major General Curtis LeMay visited the 38th Field Hospital. LeMay commanded the 21st Bomber Command. All B-29 operations in the Pacific Theater reported to him. He had heard about the City of Los Angeles incident, had read the initial after-action reports, had learned that a radio operator had picked up a burning phosphorus canister with his bare hands, carried it through the aircraft, and thrown it out a window while on fire and blind. LeMay understood what that meant. Irwin had saved the aircraft, saved the crew, acted with complete disregard for his own life under conditions that should have been instantly fatal. LeMay recommended Irwin for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation was drafted on April 15th. The citation detailed the action, described the phosphorus explosion, described Irwin's burns, described his decision to pick up the canister, described the 14-foot walk through the fuselage, described throwing the canister through the window, described his collapse. The citation concluded with the standard Medal of Honor language, conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. The recommendation went to Washington. The War Department reviewed it on April 17th. Normally, Medal of Honor recommendations required months of review. Witness statements had to be collected. The action had to be verified through multiple sources. A board had to convene. But this case was different. The entire crew had witnessed the action. The injuries were documented. The medical staff confirmed the severity. The recommendation was approved on April 19th. President Harry Truman signed the award authorization on April 20th. General LeMay flew to Guam on April 21st. He carried the Medal of Honor with him. 9 days had passed since the action. This would be the fastest Medal of Honor processing in American military history. Previous records measured processing time in months or years. Irwin would receive his medal in 9 days. LeMay entered the hospital ward where Irwin lay in bed. Bandages covered his face, hands, and chest. He was conscious but weak. LeMay stood beside the bed. Read the citation aloud. Placed the Medal of Honor on the pillow beside Irwin's head. Irwin could not see the medal. His eyes were still bandaged. He could not hold the medal. His hands were immobilized, but he knew what had been placed beside him. Irwin survived. The infection did not kill him. The organ damage did not kill him. The shock did not kill him. He endured 43 separate surgeries over the next 30 months. Skin grafts, reconstructive surgery on his face, surgery on his hands to restore limited function, surgery on his airways to repair chemical damage. Each surgery carried risk. Each recovery period brought complications, but he survived all of them. He was discharged from the Army Air Forces in March 1947, medically retired, returned to Bessemer, Alabama. He was 25 years old. He had survived injuries that medical science said were unsurvivable. He married Betty. They had known each other before the war. She had waited for him. They raised 4 children together, 2 sons, 2 daughters. Irwin worked for the Veterans Administration for 37 years. He processed benefit claims for other veterans. He understood their paperwork. He understood their injuries. He rarely discussed his own. The medal stayed in a box. He did not display it, did not wear it to public events, did not speak about April 12, 1945, unless directly asked. When asked, his answer was brief. He was the radio operator. The smoke marker was his responsibility. He was the only person who knew exactly where the burning canister was located. He did what needed to be done. That was all. He declined interview requests for decades. In the 1980s, he began accepting occasional speaking engagements. Veterans groups, schools, military history organizations. He spoke plainly, described the facts, did not embellish, did not dramatize. On the 50th anniversary of the war in 1995, he spoke at the Air Force Academy. Cadets filled the auditorium. He told them about the mission, about the explosion, about the walk through the fuselage, about surviving. He explained that fear was irrelevant. The canister had to be removed. He was the one who could remove it. The decision was simple. Henry Eugene Irwin died on January 16, 2002. He was 80 years old. Complications from burns sustained 57 years earlier. The phosphorus had caused permanent damage to his lungs, liver, and cardiovascular system. That damage accumulated over decades. Eventually, it killed him. But he had lived 57 years beyond April 12, 1945. 57 years beyond the day he should have died. His funeral was held in Bessemer. Military honors, flag-draped coffin, honor guard. Members of the City of Los Angeles crew attended. Captain Simmerl, First Lieutenant Carlson, Sergeant Lipe. They were old men now. They testified that Irwin's burns should have killed him in the aircraft. Testified that no one could survive what he survived. Medical staff from the 38th Field Hospital attended. They testified that burns that severe were unsurvivable. Testified that medical literature in 1945 listed 0 documented cases of survival from phosphorus burns of that extent. They testified that Irwin should have died in the hospital, but he had not died. He had lived, raised a family, worked for 37 years, watched his children grow, watched his grandchildren grow. He had taken 57 years of life that physics and chemistry and medicine said he should not have had. The Medal of Honor citation had been correct. He had acted with complete disregard for his own life. He had picked up a canister burning at 5,000 degrees, had carried it through an aircraft while blind and on fire, had thrown it out a window while falling apart, had collapsed and survived, and then had lived a quiet life and never sought recognition. The medal he kept in a box was eventually donated to the Air Force Museum. It is displayed there now alongside the citation and photographs of City of Los Angeles. Visitors read the story. Most cannot believe it. The injuries were too severe. The survival too unlikely. The action too impossible. But the records are documented. The crew witnessed it. The medical staff confirmed it. 57 years of life confirmed it. Henry Irwin picked up hell with his bare hands and threw it out a window. Then he went home and never talked about it.